In the early hours of October 29, 1964, something incredible happened at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. This museum, one of the most famous in the world, held a collection of rare and valuable jewels. Among them was a huge blue sapphire called the Star of India, a 563-carat gem known for its beauty and size. The museum also displayed other priceless stones, such as the Midnight Star, a black sapphire, and the D-Long Star ruby. All these gems were protected by glass cases, and the room had an alarm system to stop thieves. But that night, something went wrong. The alarm system's battery was dead. Because of that small but critical mistake, 3 young men were able to sneak into the museum, break into the display cases, and steal some of the world's most famous jewels without anyone knowing until the next morning. This daring theft quickly became known as the Star of India heist, one of the most famous jewel robberies in American history. The 3 men who carried out the robbery were Jack Roland Murphy, Alan Kuhn, and Roger Clark. Jack Murphy, often called Murph the Surf, was a handsome, charming man who loved surfing, playing the violin, and living a flashy lifestyle. He had once been a surfing champion and was used to being in the spotlight. Alan Kuhn and Roger Clark were his friends and partners in crime. All 3 were living in Miami Beach, Florida at the time. They spent their days surfing, hanging out in hotels, and enjoying the sunny life. But behind that fun image, they were also looking for a way to make quick money. When they heard about the priceless jewels on display in New York, they came up with a bold plan: fly there, break into the museum, and steal the gems. They weren't professionals like in the movies. They didn't have high-tech tools or inside help, but they were clever and confident. They decided to rely on luck, observation, and timing. Before the night of the robbery, the 3 men visited the museum several times during the day. They blended in with the other tourists and quietly studied the gem hall, where the jewels were displayed. They noticed that the museum had old-fashioned security. The guards weren't very strict, and the alarms looked simple. They also discovered that a window on the 2nd floor of the museum didn't have a good lock. Even more importantly, they found out that the alarm system protecting the gem displays was not working properly. What they didn't know was that the alarm battery had run out of power. This meant that even if someone broke into the cases, no sound would be triggered. The men decided to act at night. They brought simple tools. Nothing fancy, just what they needed to pry open a window and break glass quietly. They dressed in dark clothes and waited until the museum closed and the city was quiet. Late that night, the 3 thieves climbed a fence at the back of the museum. Then they used a rope to climb up to the 2nd floor, where they found the window they had studied earlier. Just as they had hoped, it opened easily. They slipped inside silently. Inside the museum, it was dark and empty. They used small flashlights to see. The gem hall was quiet, and the only sound was their footsteps. They went straight to the display cases containing the jewels they wanted: the Star of India, the Midnight Star, and others. One of them used a small tool to pry open the glass cases. They expected an alarm to go off, but nothing happened. The dead battery had turned off the entire system. This mistake gave them all the time they needed. They quickly took several precious gems, including the Star of India, and placed them in their pockets. The entire job took less than half an hour. They climbed back out the same window, slid down the rope, and disappeared into the New York night. They had just stolen some of the most famous gems in the world, and no one even knew until morning. The next morning, when museum staff came in and went to the gem hall, they were shocked. The display cases were smashed open and the gems were gone. News spread quickly, and soon police officers and reporters crowded the museum. It didn't take long to realize that this was not an ordinary theft. The Star of India alone was worth over $100,000 at the time, several million dollars today. In total, about $400,000 worth of gems had been taken. The museum had some insurance, but the jewels were considered irreplaceable. The police were embarrassed that such a famous museum could be robbed so easily. When they learned that the alarm system had failed because of a dead battery, it made the story even more unbelievable. Newspapers around the world covered the case, calling it the crime of the century. Detectives from the New York Police Department began working immediately. They interviewed museum employees, checked fingerprints, and looked for clues. Soon they discovered that the thieves had entered through a window, which still had marks from a rope. Meanwhile, the police also looked into people who might have been visiting the museum in the days before the robbery. Witnesses remembered seeing 3 young men with a casual, confident attitude, not the usual kind of visitors. A few days later, police received a tip from Florida. Someone in Miami recognized descriptions of the men in the news and told the authorities that they matched Jack Murphy and his friends. The men had suddenly taken a trip back to Miami right after the robbery. The police tracked them down to a hotel in Miami Beach. When they arrested Murphy, Kuhn, and Clark, they didn't find the jewels with them. The gems had already been hidden. However, after some questioning, they led police to a locker at a bus station in Miami. Inside, the police found several of the stolen gems, including the famous Star of India. Most of the jewels were recovered, but a few, including the DeLong Star Ruby, were missing for a while. Later, a rich businessman offered a $25,000 reward for its return, and it was eventually recovered from a hideout in Florida. The 3 thieves were taken back to New York and put on trial. They were found guilty of the museum theft and sentenced to prison. However, because they cooperated with police and returned most of the stolen jewels, they didn't serve very long sentences, only a few years. After being released, their lives took very different paths. Jack Murph the Surf. Murphy continued to make headlines, but not for good reasons. A few years later, he was involved in a much darker crime, a murder case in Florida, and spent decades in prison. Later in life, he claimed to have become religious and worked as a prison minister until his death in 2020. Alan Kuhn later wrote a book about the heist and even served as a consultant for a Hollywood movie inspired by the event. Roger Clark lived more quietly after his release. The Star of India heist remains one of the most famous jewel robberies in history, not just because of what was stolen, but because of how it happened. It showed that even a world-famous museum could have serious security weaknesses. The thieves had no special training or fancy equipment. They simply took advantage of human mistakes. The dead battery that disabled the alarm system became a symbol of how one small detail can change everything. If the alarm had been working, the men would have been caught immediately. Instead, they became legends. The heist also forced museums around the world to improve their security. After 1964, the American Museum of Natural History replaced its entire alarm system, installed stronger locks, added more guards, and set strict rules for checking alarms and batteries regularly. Many other museums followed their example. Even today, more than 60 years later, people are still fascinated by the Star of India theft. Books, TV shows, and documentaries have been made about it. Part of the reason is the mix of glamour, carelessness, and luck that defined the case. The thieves weren't master criminals. They were daring, young, and a bit reckless. Their crime didn't involve violence. It was a gentleman's heist, more like something from a movie. The fact that such a huge theft happened because of something as small as a dead alarm battery makes the story almost unbelievable. There's also something timeless about the idea of stealing something so beautiful. The Star of India isn't just a gem. It's a piece of nature's art, formed over millions of years. The thought that it disappeared into someone's pocket for a few days adds a touch of mystery and romance to the story. The Star of India theft teaches several lessons. First, it shows the importance of attention to detail. A simple mistake, not checking an alarm battery, allowed a major crime to happen. Second, it reminds us that even places we think are completely safe may have hidden weaknesses. It also shows that crime, even when it seems exciting, usually ends badly. The thieves got caught within days and spent years in prison. Their moment of fame came at a high cost. Finally, the story is a reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction. If this were a movie plot, people might say it's too unrealistic. But it really happened. After being recovered, the Star of India was returned to the American Museum of Natural History. Today, it is still on display there, safely protected behind modern glass and a much better alarm system. Visitors can see it and learn about its incredible history, both its natural beauty and the thrilling story of the night it was stolen. The gem still shines brightly, not only as a precious stone, but also as a symbol of one of the most daring and famous jewel heists ever. The Star of India jewel theft of 1964 is a story of daring, luck, and human error. Three young men, Jack Murphy, Alan Kuhn, and Roger Clark, saw an opportunity and took it. They slipped through a museum window, took priceless gems, and vanished into the night. But their success lasted only a few days before the law caught up with them. The dead battery that failed to power the museum's alarm became a small but powerful symbol in history. It showed how even great institutions can make simple mistakes, and how those mistakes can change everything. In the end, the gems were found, justice was served, and the world learned an unforgettable lesson. Sometimes, history can turn on something as small as a dead battery,